Hello, my name's Alina, and I used to believe that family, no matter how broken, wouldn't erase you on purpose. But then my stepmother looked me in the eye, just hours after my father's funeral, and said, "Now that your dad's dead, get out, you filthy little parasite. Never come back." They didn't just kick me out of the house. They scrubbed my name from his will, deleted me from family photos, emptied our joint accounts, and called me not even his blood. So I have to ask, how do you fight back when your own family rewrites you out of your father's legacy? Would you stay quiet, or would you burn the lie down, one truth at a time? The snow hadn't stopped since morning. By late afternoon, Bozeman was wrapped in a sheet of white so thick it muffled even the sound of tires over gravel. I stepped out of my car, my black coat brushing against the salt-stained side as I shut the door gently. No one noticed me walking up the stone path to the front porch, not my half-brother, not the old family friends cluttered in the entryway with their casseroles and condolences. Inside, it smelled like roast beef, dollar store candles, and control. Vera had staged the entire house like a Martha Stewart set, curated grief. Everyone played their part, everyone but me. The room buzzed with warm nostalgia, light laughs, clinking glasses. My father's funeral had just ended an hour ago. People were already talking about summer barbecues. Vera, dressed in a charcoal gray suit that cost more than my monthly rent, stood by the fireplace, accepting handshakes like a senator. I spotted Thatcher across the room. He was balancing a glass of wine, listening to someone drone on about Dad's work ethic. Our eyes met for half a second, then he looked away, like he'd glanced at something unclean. My stomach curled. Vera clapped her hands twice. "Everyone, if I may," she said, stepping forward with a kind of poised authority that made my skin itch. "I'd like to say a few words about Enzo." People hushed. Even the wine stopped being poured. "Enzo was the love of my life," she began. "A builder, a father, a man of faith. He raised a family with grit and grace. He never missed a Sunday roast, and he believed in doing things the right way." I stood there, still as stone, waiting. She kept going. "And I know, looking around this room, he would be so proud of the legacy he leaves behind, especially the children who carry his name, his values, and his vision for what it means to be a Gennaro." There it was, that deliberate phrasing. Children was plural. Carry his name. Not me. My last name may have matched, but I knew exactly what she meant. The people in the room nodded, some smiling, eyes watering. The message landed. I wasn't one of them. I didn't wait for applause. I turned toward the hallway. Standing by the dining room, I hovered in that space where you're visible, but no one really sees you. A woman with silver curls gave me a polite nod, then turned and asked someone, "Is that the adopted one?" I almost laughed. Better than the mistake, which is what Vera once called me at Thanksgiving when she thought I was asleep upstairs. Alina. My name sounded like a threat coming from her mouth. I turned. Vera stood there, holding a flute of champagne like it was a sword. She didn't lower her voice. "Now that your dad's dead," she said, smiling like a cat watching a bird twitch, "grieve, pack your bags, and never come back, you filthy little parasite." Someone chuckled. Another shifted uncomfortably. No one said a word in my defense. I didn't give her the pleasure of a reaction. I walked calmly, mechanically, down the hall and locked myself in the powder room. It smelled of bleach and lilies, and I stared into the mirror, gripping the sink. My mascara was still flawless. My life wasn't. I saw him again, just last week, sitting in his recliner, watching football, holding my hand like he used to when I was little. "Don't let them rewrite our story," he had whispered, like he knew. "You were the only one who stayed." I splashed cold water on my face, dried it with a monogrammed hand towel, walked out with my spine straight. Upstairs, the guest room door was ajar. My suitcase was outside the door, already zipped. My father's watch was missing from the dresser where he always kept it. I didn't ask who took it. I slid on my coat, picked up the suitcase, and walked past a cluster of people laughing in the kitchen. No one said goodbye. Out in the car, I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't ask why, or how could they. I just sat there, watching the snow fall under the yellow porch light. My fingers clenched the steering wheel. My jaw ached from holding everything in. I thought grief would be the hardest part. Turns out, being erased hurts more. And as Vera's final words played on loop in my head, a new voice stirred inside me. One I hadn't listened to in years. They think I'm done. I didn't drive straight home after leaving Vera's house that night. My hands were shaking too much, and I needed time to remember who I was before I walked back into a life that suddenly didn't fit me anymore. I ended up pulling into a gas station a few miles outside of Bozeman. It was one of those quiet, out-of-the-way spots where no one asks questions if you sit in your car too long. The heater buzzed faintly, the snow fell slower now, and I dug into my purse to pull out the funeral program. The paper was creased and already soft at the edges from being handled too many times. On the back was a photo collage, supposedly celebrating my father's life. Smiling faces, handshakes, backyards. There was Vera in a wide-brimmed hat at a picnic, and Thatcher holding a hammer beside Dad. Even cousins from North Dakota I hadn't seen since I was 12 made it into a few snapshots. But not me, not a single picture. Not from holidays, not from birthdays, not even from the camping trip last year where I'd cooked every meal and helped Dad down slippery trails while everyone else posed for group shots. Cropped, reframed, removed. I folded the program quietly and placed it face down on the passenger seat. It was late when I finally pulled up to my apartment complex. My little one-bedroom was dark, quiet, and colder than usual. As I stepped inside, my voicemail light blinked on the answering machine. It was my principal. "Alina, please take the time you need. Everyone here knows how close you were with your father. I'm so sorry, truly." Her voice cracked just enough to remind me some people still saw me. I replayed it twice before deleting it. I sat on the living room floor and unzipped the suitcase I'd packed for the funeral. Only half my things were there. The blue sweater my dad gave me last Christmas was gone. So was the worn, leather-bound book of Italian poems we used to read together every Sunday night. Instead, Vera had thoughtfully tucked in a cheap candle and one of her church pamphlets, Grief, A Path to Grace. I called Thatcher. No answer. I tried again. Still nothing. No voicemail either. Just a blunt disconnect that rang louder than any silence. I didn't cry. I opened a bottle of water and sat staring at the suitcase for a long time. There wasn't even a pair of socks in there I hadn't bought myself. A few hours later, unable to sleep, I reached for my laptop. Out of habit, I opened Facebook. There it was, Vera's latest post, bright and polished, titled, "A Life Well Remembered." The first image was Dad in his workshop, smiling. The next few showed him and Vera at their anniversary dinner, then one of Thatcher giving a speech at the funeral. Scrolling down, I saw the photo from that family reunion barbecue, the one I had taken. In the version Vera posted, I wasn't in the frame. Even the group shots had been edited. I knew because I remembered where I'd been standing, in between Dad and Aunt Julia. They'd cropped it, pulled it tighter around everyone else. Comments rolled in. "What a beautiful legacy. Enzo was such a great father. You raised them well, Vera." Them, raised them, like I hadn't existed. I didn't sleep that night. I just kept clicking through pictures, looking for one that proved I'd ever been part of that family. None did. By morning, I had decided to stop asking permission to belong. I drafted a simple email to the family attorney. Hi, I would like to formally request access to my father's personal belongings. There are items of sentimental value I'd like to recover. Please advise on how to proceed. I received a response within 20 minutes. Alina, as you are not listed as a legal beneficiary in Mr. Gennaro's estate, all physical property has been transferred to Mrs. Vera Ainsley. Please direct further inquiries through her counsel. Regards, Samuel Bates, Esq. I stared at the screen for a long moment. Then I typed one text. 2. Thatcher. Do you have Dad's watch? The one he told me would always be mine. It said, seen. No reply. That day, I walked to work instead of driving. The cold helped keep my anger from boiling over. At the school entrance, a student handed me a small sympathy card. I'm sorry about your dad, Ms. Gennaro, she said quietly. I thanked her, tucked it into my bag, and walked to my classroom. I didn't cry there either, but I did pull out a sticky note and write 5 words in capital letters. Erase a daughter. Erase a legacy. I pressed it flat inside my desk drawer, right beneath the planner I'd been using since January. My fingers lingered on the edge of the drawer before I closed it. I didn't know what I'd do next, but I knew one thing. They thought the story ended at the funeral. They didn't expect I'd start writing the next chapter. The following morning, the sun barely crept over the edge of my blinds before I was awake. I hadn't slept much, just lay there in that quiet apartment, half expecting some crack in the wall to open and pour out all the things no one said the day before. But nothing came. Just the hum of the fridge and the soft creak of the floor as I walked barefoot to the counter to start a pot of coffee. My phone buzzed right after I'd poured the first cup. It was an email forwarded from my father's old business address, which I'd forgotten was still listed as a contact on a few old accounts. The subject line read simply, Condolences. Attached was a scanned sympathy card. Inside, written in careful, slightly shaky cursive, were just a few lines. Alina, I hope you're holding up. Enzo told me he updated his will last spring. Said he wanted things done the right way. If you need anything, call me. R. Luce, Richard Luce. That name hit like a tuning fork inside my chest. He'd been one of Dad's longest-running clients, and from what I remembered, the kind of man who still opened car doors and paid for things in cash. I hadn't seen him in years, but he was the sort of person Dad trusted, probably more than his own lawyer. My hand trembled slightly as I opened my laptop and searched for the number to the estate attorney. It was past 8. They'd be open. Bates Law, this is Lauren. How may I direct your call? Hi, my name is Alina Gennaro. I'm calling regarding Enzo Gennaro's estate. Silence on the line for a moment, then, 1 moment, please. I was transferred. A few clicks, then a voice, detached, professional. Miss Gennaro, the estate was closed last week. Your name was not listed among the beneficiaries. Is there something else I can help you with? No, I said, breath catching. That'll be all. I hung up without saying goodbye. That afternoon, I drove down to the courthouse. I walked up the marble steps, feeling like I was pushing through concrete. Inside, the probate office was quiet, save for the scratch of pens and the soft clacking of a keyboard. I'd like to see the will for Enzo Gennaro, I said to the woman behind the desk. She raised an eyebrow, but didn't ask questions. After a few minutes of searching, she handed me a copy, dated nearly 2 years ago. 2 years. I walked out into the snow with the document in my hands and questions curling like smoke in the back of my mind. Dad had mentioned changes. I remembered it clearly. Late spring, we'd gone for a drive together, windows down, his hand resting on the wheel like always. Out of nowhere, he asked, "Do you trust people who smile too much?" It hadn't made sense then. It did now. Back home, I booted up my computer and logged into Dropbox. There it was. A folder named For AG. It had been untouched for months, password protected. I tried my birthday. No luck. Then I typed the phrase he'd always used when I had a hard week. Keep building. It opened. Inside were a few files, scanned receipts, a video labeled Garage Notes, Movi, and one PDF titled Gennaro Witnessed Hand Copy PDF. But before I opened anything, I called the number from the card. "Hello?" His voice was gravel, soft but solid. "Mr. Luce, this is Alina. You mentioned in your note that my father made a new will?" A pause. Then, "Yes, we met for lunch last April. He said he wanted to ensure his daughter, was protected, not just remembered." I nodded, though he couldn't see me. "Would you mind meeting?" I asked. We agreed on a small diner near the edge of town, one with a red neon sign that buzzed even in the daytime. When I arrived, Richard was already there, wearing a pressed flannel shirt and sipping black coffee. "You look like him," he said. "I've heard that less and less lately." He slid a flash drive across the table. "I don't have the original. He kept that, but I scanned everything the day he signed it, said it was in case someone got smart." I blinked at the drive. "Did anyone else know?" "Not that I'm aware of, but he seemed worried." Said Vera had become too comfortable. Said if he passed unexpectedly, things might not be what they looked like. We talked for nearly an hour. He didn't over-explain, just gave me facts, dates, confirmed his signature on the witness line. He hadn't seen the final filed will, but hearing what I told him, he seemed to expect it. As I stood to leave, he placed a hand gently on mine. "Be careful," he said. "Vera's more connected than you think. People owe her favors. Some still fear her husband's name, though it was you who carried him through the last few years." Back home, I laid everything out on the kitchen table. The printed copy of the official will, Richard's drive, my own half-filled suitcase, still unpacked from the day everything changed, 2 versions of the truth, 2 paths forward, and only one of them had my name on it. I whispered to the empty room. "You tried to erase me, Vera. Let's see how well you covered your tracks." The air inside First Mountain Bank felt too clean, too temperature-controlled. I hadn't been there in years, not since I tagged along with Dad one summer afternoon when he insisted on showing me how to deposit checks the old-fashioned way. He'd waved to every teller like they were cousins. That day, he bought us both root beers from the vending machine outside. Now, the same carpeted floors muffled the sound of my boots as I approached the counter, birth certificate in one hand, a copy of my father's final bank statement in the other. A young teller, maybe 22, greeted me with a rehearsed smile. She took one look at the paperwork and went pale before mumbling something about needing to get the branch manager. It took 5 minutes, then another 10. When the manager finally arrived, a man in a navy sweater vest with a too-tight smile, he gestured for me to follow him into a glass office near the back. The door clicked shut behind us. "I'm Alina Gennaro," I said calmly, laying the documents on his desk. "My father had a joint account here. I'd like to understand what happened to it." He adjusted his glasses and opened the file. "Yes, Enzo Gennaro. We've had that account on file for quite some time, but it was closed 3 months ago." My pulse kicked up. "By who?" He hesitated. "A person with power of attorney." I stared at him. That wasn't me. He didn't say it, but his face did. He knew exactly who it had been. I'd like to see a copy of the closure documents, I said. He paused again, then nodded and disappeared into the back room. I counted ceiling tiles, 22 across, 8 down. The fourth tile from the left had a faint water stain. When he returned, he carried a folder, thick, manila, sealed with a paperclip. He handed it over like it might bite him. Inside were signed forms, transfer requests, closure authorizations. I scanned the pages until I found the signature line. There, in the lower right corner of the main document, was a familiar scrawl. But it wasn't Dad's. The loops were too tight, the pressure too heavy. My father had written like a draftsman, precise, tidy, confident. This was nervous, messy, overcompensating. I didn't need a handwriting expert to tell me who'd held the pen. May I make a copy of this? I asked, even though I already had my phone out snapping photos. The manager gave a weak nod. Back outside, I sat in my car, flipping through the pictures I'd just taken. My heart wasn't racing. It had slowed to something quieter, focused, controlled, the kind of quiet that comes right before a storm moves in. I didn't drive home. I pulled into the parking lot of a hardware store and sat in the lot, dialing the estate attorney again. This time I hit record on my phone before the call connected. Bates Law. This is Alina Gennaro. I need to ask about financial misconduct related to my father's estate. A beat of silence. Miss Gennaro, I would advise you not to stir up unnecessary confusion. These matters have been legally settled. I'm not confused, I said, steady. I'm documenting, and I'm not going away. Miss Gennaro, if you continue to probe, I cut him off. I'm not probing, I'm proving. I ended the call before he could say another word and watched the screen as the recording saved. Back home, I opened my laptop and created a new folder, Legal Options. I titled the audio file, Threat Bates Call 01.mp3. Then I grabbed the copy of the will from the courthouse and slipped on my coat again. It was late afternoon, and the sun had started dropping fast. I drove to the cemetery. The wind had picked up, carrying the scent of pine and dry snow. The ground was uneven, half-frozen mud with patches of brittle grass. I stood over my father's grave, the engraved words catching the fading light. I pulled the probate copy from my coat pocket, unfolded it, and lit a match. The paper curled instantly, black edges crumbling like burned leaves. I watched it vanish into ash at my feet. Behind me, the sound of approaching steps, heels. Vera's voice cut through the air like glass. Still playing daughter? You never knew how to be one. I didn't turn around. You just burned the wrong version of me, Vera. She chuckled. What's this? A tantrum? You're embarrassing yourself. I turned then, slowly, and met her eyes. Keep digging, I said. You might find more than bones. Her smirk faltered, just slightly. I walked away without waiting for a response. That night, I texted Richard. You were right. She moved money. I'm not staying quiet. I emailed the bank's compliance department with a subject line that read, Urgent, fraud verification request, signature dispute. I attached the scanned form and requested formal handwriting analysis. I CC'd Monica Delgado, a contact from a legal clinic I'd worked with during a school fundraiser years ago. Monica didn't do probate, but she knew people who did. Then I stood in front of my mirror and stuck a new post-it beside the one that read, Erase a daughter, erase a legacy. This one said, One more lie, and I make it loud. I hadn't expected the package. It arrived the morning after I sent the fraud complaint to the bank. I was sitting at my kitchen table, sipping the last of a lukewarm cup of coffee, when I heard the soft knock on my door. No signature required, just a plain brown envelope with my name, handwritten in careful block letters. The return address caught me off guard. Enzo Gennaro's study. I tore the top gently. Inside, wrapped in an old linen tea towel, was a single book, The Divine Comedy, Worn Spine. My father's marginal notes danced across the pages in familiar blue ink. I'd seen this book 100 times, usually on his nightstand, sometimes in his briefcase. He used it like a journal, like a vault. As I flipped through, a heavy slip of cream-colored paper fluttered loose and landed on my lap. My heart tightened before I even read the first line. I knew that handwriting. I knew the rhythm of his letters the way other people know their mother's voice. It was dated, signed, witnessed. And it wasn't the will filed with the court. My name was printed at the top in bold, to my daughter, Alina Gennaro. It was brief but clear. Everything my father owned, both financial and sentimental, was to be placed in my trust. It mentioned specific items, his tools, the house in Bozeman, the joint savings account. At the bottom, Dale Creeley's signature, the gardener. I sat frozen. For a few moments, I didn't move. I just traced the signature with my fingertip. Later that day, I drove out to Dale's place, just past the edge of town where the pavement ends and gravel starts punching under the tires. His front porch was littered with seed catalogs and a pair of worn boots. When he opened the door, his face lit up in quiet recognition. "Alina," he said, "I was wondering when I'd see you." We sat on mismatched chairs beneath a bare bulb, the scent of tobacco clinging to the wood walls. I showed him the will. He didn't flinch. "Your dad made me witness that last April," Dale said, nodding toward the paper. "Said he didn't trust Vera to play fair. Told me, if anything ever looks off, give her this." He pulled open a drawer in a side table and handed me a photo. A close-up shot of the document I held in my hands. Time-stamped. Clear. "He told me not to say anything unless you came asking." "I guess I was hoping you never would, but here we are." I looked at the photo again, then at him. "You didn't think to send this earlier?" He sighed. "I've known Vera a long time, and not in a good way. I figured if she wanted you out, she'd make it messy. Enzo said you'd be smart enough to know when to fight." I thanked him quietly and left with the original document tucked safely into my purse. Back at home, I didn't even bother with dinner. I laid the handwritten will next to the photocopied bank forms and the court-filed probate paperwork. Side by side, the truth was screaming, even if no one else was ready to hear it. I sent the photo and the original will to a probate attorney in Missoula, a friend of Monica's, someone outside the reach of Vera's carefully built web. By the time the sun dipped below the mountains, I had drafted a preliminary affidavit and copied everything to a thumb drive I labeled in black Sharpie. "Dad, the truth." I was brushing my teeth when my phone buzzed. "Vera." Text message. "I heard you're poking where you don't belong." I stared at the screen, the taste of mint drying on my tongue. I took my time responding. "It was never yours to bury." I left it at that. Then I walked over to the wall beside my desk, printed the photo Dale gave me, and pinned it right next to the sticky note. "Erase a daughter. Erase a legacy." Beneath the photo, I added a new one in red marker. "You wanted silence. I'll give you documentation." I stepped back and looked at that wall. It wasn't much to anyone else, but to me, it was a war map, and I was done playing quiet. The next morning, the frost on my windshield was stubborn. I scraped it slowly, deliberately, as if clearing the ice could do something to the fog in my chest. With the photo of Dad's will now hanging beside my desk and the flash drive safe in my bag, I felt something unfamiliar. Momentum. By 9:30, I was sitting in a corner office downtown, the walls lined with certificates and case photos. Monica Delgado, the probate attorney Monica from Missoula had referred me to, reviewed every document I laid out in front of her. She didn't rush. She didn't smile either, not until she hit the signature on the bank closure form. "This isn't Enzo's signature," she said, turning the page sideways. "And it's not close." I already knew it, but hearing someone say it, someone who mattered in court, made it feel real in a new way. She flipped to another page, then looked at me. "We'll start with a fraud complaint, both financial and estate-related. I'll also need a notarized statement from you and Dale. The timeline matches what you've told me. We'll have enough to raise a red flag, maybe more." For the first time in weeks, I breathed without feeling like I was being watched. Back home, I boiled water for tea and watched snow collect at the windowsill. The kettle hadn't even whistled when my phone buzzed. A notification from Monica's office. Subject line: Formal notification sent. Ainsley Estate. CC, Vera Ainsley. Message: Pending legal action, financial misconduct and document forgery. The second buzz came seconds later, a name I hadn't seen light up my screen in days. "Thatcher, what are you doing?" he asked, skipping hello. His voice was clipped, panicked. "You're going to blow this whole thing up. You know that, right? She's what?" I asked, steady. He didn't answer. "You let her destroy everything," I said, "the day you chose silence." There was a long pause. Then the line went dead. No apology, no defense. I turned off my phone and sat at the table, staring out at the snow. Then I got to work. For the rest of the afternoon, I pulled every scrap I had. Email exchanges with Dad, texts about account updates, holiday cards where he wrote inside jokes only we understood. I matched handwriting samples. I printed statements and highlighted transactions that didn't line up. I gathered everything Vera could try to dispute. Monica texted back by dusk. "Got your files? Building your affidavit. We'll hold formal filing until face-to-face confrontation. Prep for fireworks." And then, "You okay?" I replied with one word: focused. It was dark when I drove across town to meet with Harold Evans, the attorney who'd prepared the earlier version of Dad's will. He worked out of a one-story office attached to his house and greeted me wearing a cardigan and moccasins. The man was 70 if he was a day, but his handshake still had conviction. "Your father was nervous," he said, flipping through the handwritten will I brought. "Told me not to trust Vera if anything happened suddenly. I didn't want to get involved, but I recognize this. It matches what we discussed in March last year. He didn't file it through me, though." "Do you remember what he said exactly?" Harold nodded. "He said, 'I'm writing this down myself because I don't trust anyone but Alina.' And then he asked if I knew a good shredder. I thanked him, got the confirmation in writing, and left before the snow got heavier. I saw Vera's name pop up on my screen 6 times on the drive back. I didn't pick up. The 6th time, I blocked her number. Later that night, with the house quiet and the documents spread across the table, I pulled out my journal and wrote, "They forged my name in the narrative. I'm writing myself back in, permanently." The words didn't feel poetic. They felt earned. I needed air. I slipped on Dad's old flannel and boots and drove out to the cemetery. The gate was still open. No one else was there. I walked up to his grave, carefully, step by step, and sat beside it on the icy grass. I stayed silent at first, just breathing, just listening to the cold. Then I spoke softly. "Dad, you planned for this. I found it all, and I won't let it end the way they wanted." I took the sealed envelope out of my coat, the one holding the affidavit, the will copies, the original bank form, and placed it at the base of the headstone. Not for legal reasons. For him. And then I whispered, so only the wind could carry it. Some people bury secrets, others bury evidence. I'm done burying anything. The receptionist didn't look me in the eye as she buzzed me in. That was fine. I wasn't here to be seen. I was here to be remembered. The conference room was colder than it needed to be. Everything inside screamed quiet intimidation. Framed degrees, gleaming wood panels, the faintest hint of lemon oil in the air. Vera had picked this place for a reason, Ainsley Co. Law was known for burying things neatly. But today, I wasn't here to bury anything. I walked in wearing my father's old wool coat. It still smelled like cedar and the faint trace of sawdust that seemed to live in his skin. Monica stood and gave me a small nod, her eyes sharp behind her glasses. On the table in front of her was the folder. Thick, precise, organized. Evidence, not opinions. Across from us sat Vera, legs crossed, nails freshly painted, her jaw tighter than usual. Next to her, Thatcher looked like a man bracing for an earthquake that had already begun. "Shall we begin?" Monica's tone was cordial, but not warm. She flipped the folder open and removed the first document. "This is a handwritten will by Enzo Gennaro, dated April of last year, witnessed by Dale Creeley, notarized. Names Alina Gennaro as the sole beneficiary of personal and financial assets." The silence was immediate, tight. Vera didn't flinch, but I could see her jaw twitch. Monica continued, pulling out the next item. "This is an affidavit from Mr. Creeley detailing the signing, along with a time-stamped photograph taken on the day of execution." Still, Vera said nothing, but Thatcher shifted in his seat. Then Monica pulled out the page I'd stared at a dozen times in the past 2 weeks. "This is a forensic handwriting analysis of the signature used to close the joint account. The analyst concludes with 97% confidence that the signature does not match Mr. Gennaro's documented handwriting." She placed it on the table, facing the lawyers across from her. "And this," Monica said, sliding over a USB drive, "is an audio file. A phone call in which a member of your firm implied to Miss Gennaro that she should stop asking questions, or there would be consequences. We thought it might be relevant." A soft clatter broke the stillness. One of the junior associates, someone barely old enough to rent a car, stood abruptly and muttered something about the restroom before fleeing the room. Vera finally spoke. "This is absurd. You're all being manipulated by dusty memories and amateur theatrics. Enzo was not of sound mind when he wrote that document." Monica didn't blink. "Then perhaps you can explain these?" She opened another file, email printouts. "Sent from your account," Monica added, "requesting expedited closure of the Gennaro joint account, including language that states, quote, 'No surviving daughter expected to claim.'" Vera's lips parted slightly, but no words came out. My heart didn't race. I didn't shake. I sat there and watched her struggle with silence. That was the difference between us. I'd learned to live inside it. She only knew how to fill a room with noise. Thatcher looked pale. His fingers tapped against his coffee cup until Vera shot him a glare. "Thatcher," Monica said softly, "do you have anything you'd like to add?" He hesitated. "She told me to stay out of it," he finally said, his voice rough. "Said it was family business." "I didn't know about the will." I turned my head slowly toward him. "You knew about me," I said. That was enough. He looked down, ashamed, not because he'd lied, but because he knew silence is its own kind of violence. Monica stood then, straightening the edges of the folder. "We will be filing a motion to reopen probate under suspicion of fraud, concealment, and financial misappropriation, unless, of course," she looked directly at Vera, "you'd like to settle today, off the record and publicly." The lead attorney beside Vera whispered in her ear. Her nostrils flared. Her fingers gripped the arms of her chair. Alina Gennaro, they'd called me the mistake, the invisible one, the afterthought. Now, the room couldn't look away. I didn't smile, not really, just held my breath steady. You don't need to scream when the truth does the shouting for you. The footage wasn't flashy, no dramatic music, no clickbait transitions. Just the facts. A scanned handwritten will, my father's signature, and a cold, clipped voice reading aloud Vera's email. Ensure she gets nothing. I didn't sit through it. I didn't need to. I stood at the back of the Bozeman Community Foundation's spring gala, tucked between the last row of banquet chairs and the double doors leading out to the lobby. The room was lit with soft gold chandeliers, white tablecloths, and delicate centerpieces of spring tulips. They'd just finished serving dessert, lemon tarts and espresso, when the MC began introducing Vera as the recipient of that year's Legacy in Leadership Award. I could have laughed. Instead, I waited. The lights dimmed for the tribute video. It opened with smiling portraits of Vera at charity drives, cut to footage of her making speeches about women in leadership and stewardship of community values. The audience clapped politely, leaning back in their chairs. Then came the interruption. The screen flickered. Suddenly, the scrolling images stopped. A new slide appeared. Last Will and Testament. Enzo Gennaro. Handwritten, dated 04/12. People paused. Then came the quote, "Ensure she gets nothing." It was her voice, her words, pulled from an email. The next clip, audio of a phone call, Vera's again, dismissing me as not even his blood. That one landed harder. By the time the last frame faded into black, the air had changed. The applause never resumed. Chairs creaked as people shifted. Someone coughed. I heard the rustle of napkins being folded. One of the major donors, a man I remembered from childhood parades, stood up and left without saying a word. The woman seated beside him grabbed her coat and followed. Vera rose slowly from her table, clutching the back of her chair. "I didn't authorize," she started. The microphone screeched with feedback. The chairwoman of the foundation stepped onto the stage, clearly rattled. "We'll be reviewing this matter immediately," she said stiffly, "and reevaluating all current board positions." I didn't wait for more. I turned and walked out. Outside, the spring night was cold enough to cut through my coat. I kept walking until I hit the edge of the lot, then paused under a flickering lamppost. I took out my phone and opened my notes app. I copied and pasted the statement I'd drafted earlier that day and posted it across every platform I still had access to. Justice isn't about humiliation, it's about correction. My father's name, and mine, deserve better. And now, we'll have it. Within an hour, my inbox lit up. Former students, teachers I hadn't spoken to in years, even a few of Dad's old friends from the building crew. All of them reposted, shared, added their own memories. By morning, Vera's name had been pulled from the foundation's website. Her profile on the Women's Leadership Council was under review. A conference where she was scheduled to speak issued a statement. "We stand by transparency and ethical stewardship." She hadn't just lost a title, she lost her audience. A few days later, a plain envelope appeared in my mailbox. No return address. Inside was a blank check and one sentence, scribbled in faint pencil. I was wrong. No name, no signature. But the handwriting, I'd seen it before. Vera's, pressed harder than usual, maybe from anger, maybe from shame. Thatcher called the same week. I didn't answer. He sent a message. "I've resigned from Ainsley Construction. I should have stepped up earlier. I see that now." I didn't reply. Some wounds don't need salt. They just need time. That Saturday, I drove past the old neighborhood. I didn't stop, just looked at the house where I used to wait on the front porch for Dad to come home. It had new shutters now. The garden was a mess. A for sale sign stood crooked in the yard, the kind that spoke of rushed exits and quiet shame. Back home, I sat at the desk in my small apartment. I didn't open the check. I placed it in a drawer next to the flash drive. Some things were better left untouched. Public shame was never the goal. Peace was, and I was almost there. 2 weeks after the gala, I found myself driving past the old train tracks out toward Arrow Ridge. The snow had melted into soft patches of green, and the air smelled of pine and new dirt. I hadn't told anyone I was leaving town. I didn't need to. No more court dates, no press calls, just keys in my hand and a deed in my name. Gennaro Future Trust. Dad had bought the cottage quietly, 2 months before his heart gave out. A simple place, 1 story, perched at the edge of a hill with views that swallowed the horizon. I parked in front of the wooden fence, the paint chipped in places but still sturdy. When I unlocked the front door, I found a folded note resting on the kitchen counter. For the life you deserve to live, finally on your terms. I didn't cry. I touched the paper like I was shaking his hand one last time. Then I opened every window, let the air in, and walked the perimeter of the house slowly, like I was meeting something sacred for the first time. The place was humble. 2 bedrooms, a stone fireplace, shelves lined with books he'd probably intended for me. As some still had sticky notes, Alina, P. 76, or reminds me of that camping trip. A week later, while setting up the internet, I logged into one of Dad's old Gmail backups, a habit born of cleaning out digital dust. Buried in a folder labeled AG was a single draft email. It was never sent. The subject line was blank, but the message wasn't. If I'm gone and she comes for you, don't fight like I did. Fight smarter. You're the best thing I ever built, Alina. Don't let them tear that down. I leaned back in the chair and let the screen blur. The cursor blinked at the end of his sentence like it was waiting for me to reply. I didn't type anything. Instead, I printed it, folded it, and pinned it beside the others. His will, the affidavit, the note from Dale. Not because I needed proof anymore, but because I wanted to remember the version of him that prepared for this, who saw me clearly when no one else did. That summer, I launched the Gennaro Legacy Fund. It wasn't grand. No national campaigns, no TV spots, just a website, a mission, and a small board of women who knew what it felt like to be talked over, passed by, or boxed out of their own family story. The first scholarship went to a high school student named Lila who wanted to study architecture. When I handed her the envelope at a community center event, she looked at me and whispered, "My mom said you must be brave." I just smiled. "You don't need to scream to exist," I told the room. But when someone tries to silence you, make sure your legacy speaks louder. A month later, I came home one morning after walking the trail behind the cottage and noticed an envelope tucked under the welcome mat. No stamp, no name. Inside was a photo of me and Dad from my 12th birthday. Me in braces and pigtails, him holding a cake with way too many candles. On the back was a note in a handwriting I recognized immediately. "You were always there for him. I wasn't. I'm sorry." Thatcher. No grand apology, no explanation, but in that sentence, he finally showed up. I didn't call. I didn't reply. I tucked the photo into a frame on the mantel, right beside a copy of Dad's tool belt, now hanging like a relic in my front hallway. That evening, I sat by the fireplace, sipping chamomile tea as the wind brushed against the window panes. A box of old family photos rested on my lap. I opened it and began labeling them, carefully, truthfully, no edits, no exclusions. I wrote names with full dates, small anecdotes in the margins. They'd tried to write me out, but I rewrote the ending. I paused over one photo, Dad smiling in the backyard, sunlight catching his hair, my 12-year-old self clinging to his arm. Vera faded into a footnote. I, finally, became the headline of my own story. Some families won't scream when they cut you out. They'll just smile while doing it. But legacy isn't just about who's written in the will. It's about who shows up, who stays, and who carries the truth when no one else will. Have you ever been quietly erased and had to fight for your place all over again? If this story struck a chord, share your thoughts below. And don't forget to subscribe for more powerful true-life revenge stories that remind us silence isn't weakness. Sometimes it's just the calm before the storm.